Bruce E. Haney, age 80, born on February 1, 1935. Lived at Valley, Nebraska for 5 years, and then the family moved to Omaha. I've been in Omaha ever since. Interestingly enough, when we lived in Valley, my father worked for the power company, and his job was to sell farmers on the idea of hooking up to electricity, long before we sent a man on the moon and many other accomplishments. I went to Our Lady of Lourdes grade school. At one time, I counted the number of grade school children going to Our Lady of Lourdes on my block, and there were 50 kids. So we had our own sports league right there, just on the very same block. I remember when I was 7 years old, a kid on the next block, I think he was about 15 years old, World War II was on, and he decided to raise money to buy bonds for World War II. Abbott and Costello were in town performing at the Orpheum, and he went down to the Hill Hotel and knocked on their door and invited them to come out to his neighborhood and perform for free, and they agreed to do that. He had to tell them how to take the streetcar to get there. There were no buses in that day, and there were very few people that had automobiles in World War II. By golly, they came out on a streetcar, performed on the platform of a flatbed truck. He got Father Flanagan, the founder of Boys Town, to come out and also appear on stage, and raised $2,500 for war bonds. Charged 10 cents a person admission. I didn't have 10 cents at age 7, so I entered by walking across the neighbor's yard. But that was quite a thing, because Abbott and Costello were probably the #1 entertainers in the United States at that time. When I was about maybe the 8th grade, beginning high school, I invented what I called a cupsicle, and it was basically Kool-Aid in a waxed paper cup, and as it began to freeze, I would put a wooden stick in it. I sold those in the neighborhood, I think for a dime. I made enough money to pay 2 years at Creighton Prep and enough money for 2 years at Creighton University in those days. Of course, Creighton Prep had gone from $90 a year to $110 a year my last 2 years of school when I had to pay for it. Creighton University, I could get by on about $500 a semester, and I had some money left over when I had to go into my college career. Got interrupted by the Korean War incident, and to get the GI Bill, we had to go on active duty within 6 months of the time that they had ceased fire in Korea. And so I had some money. I had a kindly uncle in Denver who invested the money in real estate. We doubled our money in a very short period of time. I sent the money to my father and said, put it in the stock market, and he did. And lo and behold, that became my 50-year career, was in the stock market. All of it started with the cupsicle business out of my parents' basement back door with a toy cash register, and used my mother's freezer for my for freezing the cupsicles. The idea was copied by a local grocer by his son, because they knew I was doing a lot of business. But it carried me all the way through. When I was 16 years old, I got a job as a delivery boy for a wholesale candy company. And being a wholesale candy company, the candy manufacturers were always sending in samples. When I was in the Navy, a lot of times at night I wasn't sleeping, I would go up and help the baker, chat with the baker. He's the only person awake, really. And so I had to sample the bakery supplies. And when I was going to Creighton University, I worked at Storrs Brewery for a couple summers, and they always had plenty of supplies around. So as you can see from the candy company, the bakery, and the beer distributor, my body didn't have much of a chance of staying very slim for very long. When I started in school at age 5 in kindergarten, after one semester at the public school, the teacher strongly recommended to my mother that she take me over to the Catholic school for first grade. So that happened, and I only went to the first grade for the second semester of first grade. So I was really 6 years old when I started in the second grade. And thus, if you follow that along, I was 13 when I started Creighton Prep, and I was 16 my first semester of my senior year at Creighton Prep. But along the way, I missed some school. I believe it was when I was about the 4th grade. I had a sister who had contacted diphtheria, at least they suspected she had, and we were all quarantined at home for, I believe, about 3 months. Couldn't go to school, and when I was in the 8th grade, I broke my leg in February, and the old-time doctor kept me flat on my back for a solid month, 2 weeks in a hospital and 2 weeks at home, and then I didn't go back to school, but I graduated with my class. So I was a early bird on all of that stuff. When I was in the Navy, 2 years on an ammunition ship called the USS Mazama. The Mazama was a volcano in the state of Oregon that blew its top back in 1700 or whatever. And to this day, the lake that was formed, called Crater Lake, is the purest water in the world at the top of this high mountain. And of course, they keep it as pure as could be with restricting what a tourist can do other than look at the gorgeous blue water. But there was a time when we were trying to come from Europe to the United States, and we got caught in a terrible storm, hurricane really. It did damage to a lot of ships, stopped the fleet from making very much progress, and finally the captain of our ship, the ammunition ship, because the bombs that were shored up below decks were breaking loose and rattling around, and they claimed that we had enough explosive on there to blow up New York City 3 times. So we pulled out of the fleet over to the island of Mallorca off the coast of Spain, the capital city being Palma. And when they found out we were an ammunition ship, we had to anchor 1 mile out because of the explosives, and then take small boats into the harbor. And also on this Navy cruise, when we came back to the States on our own, after we were within the 3-mile limit, there's a 3-mile limit where foreign ships can't come in without permission, and certain things are kept out. We're within the 3-mile limit playing war games, and I saw a snorkel come up and look around, and I waved to the periscope, and it went back down, it came back up, and I realized that there were no submarines in our fleet. And a year or so later, I ran into one of the officers of the ship and mentioned that to him, and he said, "Oh yeah, they caught that. That became a very big incident because it was certainly not an American sub that was in there. So it would have had, at that point in time, been the Russians." But anyway, after 2 years sitting in the Navy, I came back and went to Creighton University, and the GI Bill was $110 a month. Creighton took $90 a month for tuition, books, and lab work. So I had $20 a month left over. Pretty easy living and a good education, well received. Then I got into the investment business right off the bat and spent 50 years in the investment business in Omaha. And in that career, I served for 20 years on the investment banking committee of the Securities Industry Association, where I went to Washington, D.C. at least twice a year, sometimes more than that, lobbying to keep bad legislation out and keep good legislation in as far as security laws and the effects on the industry. Within that, I met a lot of the power players in Washington, D.C. who would come to our dinners, our functions that we would host back there, and to talk to them about our concerns. It was a very interesting period of time. I'm going to go back a little bit to World War II. I remember clearly VE Day, Victory in Europe Day, and then later VJ Day, Victory in Japan. I was 10 years old, and I walked 1 block from my house over to 32nd Avenue. I grew up on 33rd Street between Martha and Arbor. When I walked over 1 block, caught the streetcar as close as it could get to downtown Omaha. Downtown Omaha was just turned into one great big happy celebration, and cars trying to move in some sort of a parade form, but people just joyful and happy as could be. It was really quite a time to be alive. I know right where I was when I learned that World War II had started, and of course I know right where I was when JFK was assassinated, and many of those events that were big events of my life. In 1960, my father's boss, Mr. Lloyd Skinner, called me and asked me if I would serve as his representative on the Omaha Opera Board, as he had too many commitments to fulfill, and would I go to that one and tell him about what was taking place, etc., keep him informed. And that's where I met Mr. Dick Holland, who was an advertising man, as was my father. Dick Holland became an early investor with Warren Buffett and was very involved in introducing Mr. Buffett to who then became his partner, Charlie Munger. And so Dick Holland, as a result of the money that he put with Mr. Buffett, became very, very wealthy, and he built the Holland Performing Arts Center in downtown Omaha, plus many, many other contributions in Omaha, and a huge project of trying to help those in poverty, those who were underschooled, to get the benefits the rest of us were getting so that they could grow up and be good, responsible citizens. And he has told me that that's a 20-year project before he'll really know whether it's bearing fruit or not, and should be continued. And as I say this today, he's 94 years old, but looking forward to where that 20-year project is going to go educationally. I met and married Marlene Fingston in January of 1967. Our first child, Lisa Marie, was born in December of '67, followed by a wonderful son, Matthew Bruce Haney, followed by a wonderful daughter, Janet Marie Haney, and followed by a wonderful son, Ryan Mark Haney. Lisa Haney has 5 children. 5 children are Nate, Alec, Canaan, Madeline, and Raven. Ryan has 2 children, Seamus and Sully. Matthew and his wife Katie have no children. Janet at this time is not married, has a significant other, James Bateman, a Brit. We became members of Christ the King Parish and were members there for 45 years. I became well acquainted with Father Robert Hupp, who was the pastor of that parish, and also was doing some teaching at Creighton University, at the College of St. Mary. He later became the head of Boys Town, the internationally known institution of helping young men. He was director of Boys Town for about 20 years, and later was asked to write a book about his founding of the parish of Christ King. He was the founding pastor. He asked me to be the publisher of that book, and it took some time to coordinate all of that, and the book, actually finished copies were printed about 4 days after his passing. But that was very nice to be involved in that project, and as a result of that, I, with a few others, started up a scholarship for his name at Christ the King Parish for grade school kids to go on to Catholic high schools. That scholarship amount now is over $300,000. So I'm very glad that we did start that. He was succeeded, by the way, at Boys Town by one of my Creighton Prep classmates who I first met in 1948, Father Val Peter. Father Val Peter is presently still at Boys Town, no longer the executive director. He's retired from that, but he is head of the Boys Town world famous chapel. Getting acquainted with May LaHood Borsham. And May was a great hostess, and she threw some of the most wonderful, wonderful dinner parties at her home, where she absolutely insisted that she cook all of the food. But she had such wonderful guests like Jackson and Amita Berkey, Father Steve Stillmonks, Father Tom Ward, Tom and Jane LaHood, many others. We had marvelous dinners at our house for several years. It was a wonderful time in life. I would like to mention about my brothers. Brother Roger is the oldest, and he was self-employed, a real estate developer. He developed 14 business parks in Omaha during his career. Brother Terry was in the insurance industry, founded his own company, and was able to sell that company to a public company. I was basically self-employed in the investment business. I developed all my own clients. Worked under the umbrella of a firm who executed the orders and provided the office space and the electronics, but self-employed. And younger brother Tom, who was a lawyer in Phoenix for his career, self-employed. We were all self-employed basically, and my sons are self-employed in that Matthew Haney has his own company in St. Paul, Minnesota, and in the IT world, and Ryan is in the investment business in Omaha. Again, builds his own clients, self-employed. Janet Haney is a self-employed writer, publicist, journalist, if you will, and very skilled. So I'm very proud of all of that. We never really quite got into the swim of corporate America. Being self-employed was a wonderful way to go and worked out well for all of us. During my working years, I became well acquainted with Chip Davis of Mannheim Steamroller and his wife Carol at that time, and that led to the friendship meeting through Tom Hood with Jackson Berkey and his wife Almeda. Very talented musicians, produced several CDs, was toured with the Mannheim Steamroller Christmas show for over 40 some years. Just a wonderful time in my life to know these wonderful musicians and how friendly they were and how talented they were and how often they were willing to share their talents with everybody. It was a joyful interlude to get to know and love people like that. When I was in high school, in 1945, the war ended in VED, I think it was in April, and VJD, I believe it was in August. And by September, Omaha had a hockey team. And I got an important job of holding a door open for about the first half hour before the game started to let the customers with the tickets enter to a ticket taker. And that job then meant after the game started, we could go in and watch the game for free. And I believe it might have been my third year possibly of doing that, when Gordie Howe, who became the most famous hockey player of all, came to Omaha. I believe he was 17 years old and played, and he was a sensation right off the bat. And fortunately, I was able to meet most of those hockey players by kind of hanging around after the game, and they would come out of the dressing room and visit with their fan clubs that were there. But to meet somebody of that ilk, and a lot of other good hockey players, but Gordon Howe, Terry Sawchuk are two names that really stand out. I got this job at age 16 of delivering for the wholesale candy company. It was a neighbor, Rucker Candy Company, and the founder, his wife was from Schuyler, Nebraska, maiden name of Higgins, and it was a relative from there who developed the big landing boats that were used in World War II. And there's a big monument to him at the U.S. cemetery area at the beach at Normandy, at Omaha Beach. Incidentally, to this day, I am sitting at the dining room table that I used to do my homework on when I was in grade school. After my folks sold their house, the table came to me at my house. We had a big house with 5 bedrooms, 5 baths, and a large, very large dining room. At one time we had 2 tables in it. And anyway, the one table has come now with us to our final home, which is at 11744 Mayberry Plaza in Omaha. We're right behind the St. Robert Bellamy Church in a little area called Brandon Park. And we have a backyard, a commons area, and then opens to a school playground. We have probably about a city block of green as kind of our backyard, our view. It's just marvelous to have such a thing as that in a big city. We're very, very fortunate. As a result of working at Storrs Brewery, I got acquainted with Arthur Storrs Jr. and in 1962 we had a change in the football coaching situation at the University of Nebraska, and in came a coach by the name of Bob Devaney, who turned things around immediately, went on to great success that ran for many decades. But I got acquainted with him and Mike Corrigan and all of his coaching staff, Don Bryant, through parties, dinner parties at Storrs Brewery here in Omaha that were held just for them to welcome them to Nebraska. And then thereafter, for many years, I hosted the showing of the game films on a Monday night by one of the assistant coaches here in Omaha. Later changed that to a Tuesday night. And when Monday Night Pro Football came into being. But I was often invited down to practice, and was fortunate enough to meet Tom Osborne after that and have many days of contacts with him also. It was a marvelous period of time as Nebraska became nationally known for its football prowess, and I was able to be right there with all of that action. At our home, the family home at 1514 South 106th Street, which is 1 block west of Happy Hollow Country Club, I thought of and designed an idea for a kaleidoscope to be built into the ceiling of the dining room, in the dining room over this table that I had mentioned. And it turned out that the mirrors that I got, the length of them, precluded that we had to cut a hole in the roof of the house. The mirrors were 6 feet long, and so there was not enough crawl space between the ceiling and the roof. So we had to cut a hole in the ceiling, build it, frame it, build a box around it, put a skylight over it. Had 2 stained glass wheels, motorized, turning in alternate directions, so there was a constant change of the play on the stained glass and the light that could be viewed from down below, and extended into the room about 20 inches, I recall. We had a high school teacher from Creighton Prep design a pyramid display of mirrors that were controlled by a knob underneath them, to where an individual sitting at the table could adjust their mirror and see what was going on inside the kaleidoscope clear up above the roof line as they sat at the dining table. It was quite a hit. It became a feature of a full-page spread in the Omaha World Herald. Was recorded on a video with the permission to use Chip Davis's music for the recording. Kaleidoscope makers and addicts from around the country came to a couple of parties that we had just for them. It was quite a hit, and later on a man up in above Woodstock in New York in a abandoned silo turned that into a kaleidoscope based upon what we had built here in Omaha. It was really a hallmark feature of the home. When I was going to school at Creighton, another guy and we just called ourselves the Omaha Jazz Club. We had nothing to do with it. We just used that name. We rented a ballroom in Carter Lake, It had been a gambling place I'll tell you about. We rented that and hired some musicians and had these parties, and we charged admission. And one of the guys that came to our parties was Peter Fonda, son of Henry Fonda. He was going to UNO. Henry Fonda was from Omaha. And it was off in Hollywood. And so his children, Jane and Peter, were raised by an aunt here in Omaha.
Wow.
Yeah. This gambling hall was known as the Chez Paris Club. And I don't know if the building is still there or not, but the Missouri River coming down changed its course right around up the airfield. Because you think of Iowa as all being on that side of the Missouri River, right? Mm-hmm. Well, it is today, but the river at one point was over here a little bit. So there's a piece of land up in there that's in Iowa. And so they built this building across the state line. Half was in Nebraska, half was in Iowa. If they got tipped off that not just the police, but whatever from Iowa, authorities in Iowa were going to raid them, they just had everybody stand on the Nebraska side and almost thumb their nose at the raiders because there was nobody on the Iowa side of the room to rest.
Wow.
And the same thing when Nebraska was coming after them, they just moved everybody to the Iowa side. They got away with that forever. 1947, there were strong laws passed against gambling, individual gambling in the states. Iowa had gambling at their American Legion clubs. I have a slot machine downstairs that came out of one of the American Legion clubs in Iowa that an uncle of mine got. He got two of them, and then one day he gave me one. He gave me both of them, actually. But yeah, that was quite a deal. Peter Fonda came to our parties.
Well, that's awesome.
Yeah. Yeah. There were a lot of good times. There were a lot of good times. There were a lot of